started. All right, got it. Well, welcome everyone to our last committee meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Christina, who's going to talk about our timeline and next steps. And then our main focus today will be to talk about our recommendations that we will be delivering to the city manager. And I was just mentioning to the staff group that I'll make sure to leave some time at the end. So I can just kind of go around the room. You'd be welcome to pass, but if there's any final thoughts or comments that anyone would like to share at the end of our discussion today with the city, I would love to give some space for that. So again, optional, but want to leave that space open. So Christina, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, welcome everyone. So nice to see you all. Thank you so much for being here on such a beautiful evening. But also, just before I share a little bit more about next steps, I just want to, on behalf of the city manager and the staff team at the city of Shoreline, I just want to extend our sincere appreciation. I've been part of a lot of these kinds of groups where residents and community members come together, and you all have just shown such a deep level of engagement and excitement for a topic that it doesn't always garner that sort of excitement. So I just want to share our gratitude and really appreciation for all the time and energy that you've put into this committee over the last 3 months. So it's not an easy topic, and getting to know what the city's financial situation is complicated. And I just really we all appreciate all the time you spent with us. So the recommendation is really what we're going to be, from the committee, is really what we're going to be working on this evening. And Allegra will be walking us through that tonight. And this really kicks off a whole series of next steps that really start tomorrow, which is all part of the process of setting up the legislation that would potentially put something on the ballot for the November 8th general election ballot. So as of tomorrow, we have a staff report that is due, which will include all of your report from this committee that we'll finalize this evening. And that will go forward to council for their meeting on June 13th, where they will review the 10-year financial sustainability plan, of which one of the strategies is the levy lid lift. So we will be sending this to you hopefully a week before they meet, so you can take a look at both the staff recommendation as well as your report and how your report guides the staff recommendation. But we're going to just move right along from there, expecting that evening they will direct staff to prepare legislation and the accompanying materials for a levy lid lift resolution that they'll look at 2 weeks later on June 27th. So that will all happen pretty quickly. It only takes 2 council members to make that request, which is why we're anticipating it's going to happen, and going to very quickly work from one report to the next. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily any indication of unanimous support or what they're necessarily going to be putting in it, or a rate or anything like that, but they'll have us start to work on that process for their meeting at the last meeting in June. So they will then also, at their meeting at the end of June, they will most likely then direct us, regardless of there's consensus at that point, to bring it back for council action, which is where it would actually become actionable in terms of it would actually put on the ballot the levy lid lift if they're going to have that happen. And that will occur on July 18th. There's a bit of a gap there because they do take a couple weeks off for their summer break. There's July 4th holiday and whatnot. So we'll have a little bit more time to put that together after they give us feedback at the June 27th meeting. But from there, it will go pretty quickly. If they put it on the ballot on the 18th, they will then appoint pro-con committees just a week later on July 25th. So our next steps start basically as soon as tonight's meeting ends, with a whole bunch of staff work and reports to council. We start hearing from them on their feedback on the night of the 13th of June, and start reacting and responding to those points and preparing the legislation and so on and so forth. So very, very quick turnaround. So this all brings us back to tonight and why we're here. Like I said, Allegra is going to walk us through the final report for the committee. And if we have time at the end, there's more questions that have been coming in today that we would love to attend to if we have time, but we're going to focus on the report since we really need this as a foundation for all of our next steps. So with that, I'll give back to Allegra.
Thanks. And I just wanted to check, Sarah, was there anything that you wanted to share with the group before we get started?
I guess the only addition I would make to what Christina said is, as we mentioned before, that staff have been and will continue to be working on updating the forecast. So the numbers that you see going to council, that forecast is going to look different. We just weren't able to get everything ready in order to bring that to you. It's a lot of work, but I think all of your recommendations apply even if the model looks different. And when I say it looks different, what I mean is it's not probably going to look as good as it looked when we, because things have changed a lot since November, as far as inflation and such. But so that's just fair notice that when you see it, you'll go, those aren't the same numbers that we talked about, and that's why. But anyway, so I would just add that.
Very much in the midst of real time activity from the city side. So
sausage making, as we like.
Sausage making, yeah, that's often. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And I think the main thing that will be, the report actually largely will look the same as the version that that I sent around. A couple people, when we sent this around the first time, or when I was sent this around, we had the initial survey results, and there were a few people who had gone into the last meeting sort of not sure of where they stood on a couple things. And so they followed up to say, all right, we've had more discussion, and I just wanted to clarify a few things and give some guidance on rate setting or support for some of the enhanced services, et cetera. So I've got some notes in track changes, and I'll show you where there are changes since you last saw it. But this is also an opportunity for people to make other edits tonight. And I want to just make sure, is this a size that is manageable for people? Because I can make it bigger. I see John peering way in, but I think I can go a little bit bigger here. Maybe that will help.
That's good.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So, our audience primarily is Debbie. So I haven't got a lot of information in terms of introduction and background, but did want to provide some because this is something that would be available to members of the public. So I didn't want someone to pick it up with no context for what this is. But just wanted to check in with people on the introduction. Well, let's just start with introduction committee roster. I want to make sure that I don't have anybody's name or neighborhood wrong, or if there was anything else that anybody wanted to add or comment on here. Thank you for the visual head shaking and that sort of. All right. The background material is really largely out of the materials that the city has, actually some of them on their website and that were shared with you. Again, Debbie lives and breathes this stuff, so didn't spend a lot of time on this, but just wanted to, again, for if it was a casual member of the public picking this up, did want to provide a little bit of the same background that you all had. So anything anyone wanted to talk about there before we get to the recommendations?
I would like to ask, you've used in the forecast model the consumer price index going from 23 to 30. Wouldn't it be helpful to also show what you're forecasting for that in terms of the table that's shown on this page?
I will look to the city to answer that one.
We could, because that actually does color the changes. As I mentioned, that those numbers are what are changing in the update to council, but that would be, I think, a fairly easy addition.
What's the title of this section again, Allegra?
It's background.
Oh,
I'm not sure for background. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to be covering that in the staff report. So I don't think that's necessarily needed in this case, but
Mhm.
it will be going to council in a different way.
maybe there, as we walk through the report, maybe we could see if there would be another section where it might
Okay.
be more relevant than background, because I see background's looking at what had happened.
Yeah, the point here was to refer to what happened in 2016 and therefore what had been used up to 2022. But John, I think at least there's assurance that the staff report is going to show what are the rates being used in the model. And then we can, as we go through, decide if it makes sense to add that here.
Okay.
I have a question
Yeah.
on that. I read this thing several times and right here with this chart, we say that set the rate at 139 and then allowed the lid to be lifted each year. And is that percent, does that mean that it was lifted 2.99% of 139 and then 3.28% of 139? I don't think that little chart down there, the percent change, is self-explanatory. And I think those percentages need to be directly tied to a figure. Percent of what?
Sarah, am I correct that 2.99% is on the total amount that the city can collect? And so probably what you need to do is have really 3 lines to me, which is how much more money did it allow you to collect? And then secondly, what did it do to the actual levy rate that is charged per thousand? Because the 3% increase on $1.38 would be about 9 cents more, I think, if I'm wrong. Anyhow, the point is it might be more instructive if you could sort of add what does the 3% translate into the per thousand levy rate.
Yeah.
Can I comment? I was trying to do this mathematically earlier, and it didn't come out mathematically for me at all when I actually called Christina, because I was comparing so like in 2017, that rate was 1.39. Then in 2018, it was 1.26. And in 2019, it was 1.24. So it actually went down. So, and I know Christina, you and Sarah, you all can explain why that is better than I can, but it has to do with that big, the big pool of all the properties in Shoreline that are, it's all those numbers that are factored in together. But yeah, so I couldn't do it mathematically, and I was thinking along the same lines as well.
Well, and I'll look to staff to answer that question. And I guess then a question I would have back to the group is, if this chart is going to lead people to try to do their own math, which is not really possible with the information we're provided here, I'm wondering if we just remove this chart, because Debbie knows this information. She's well aware of what the rate that was used. And what I'm hearing is that this information is potentially causing sort of more confusion than clarifying. So yeah, Lisa.
I think one of the problems we have, though, is as a group, we're being asked to offer an opinion about the initial rate for the first year. And then, of course, there's the limit factor, which we've been told could either be a set percentage or we could tie it to something else like a consumer price index. And then there's also the additional opinion that we're being asked about which consumer price index, if we choose that as a recommendation. And that's why I included the other information from that really good resource manual about tying it to a national consumer price index, being a preference that's recommended for municipalities and cities. And so I guess, on the one hand, we're being asked to provide opinions about this. And by necessity, the types of opinions we're being asked to provide requires us to look at these figures and understand the application.
Mhm. Yeah,
I,
no, I think that's fair. The one thing, and I'll go to you, Robin, I would
Okay.
say, and that's partly why we're trying to frame sort of what's the guidance around the rate setting, because I think there's an understanding of the actual rate itself is an impossible task, given that right now, as we've discussed, it's a moving target. The model's being updated, inflation looks different. You know, city staff are sort of like running the numbers as, you know, not as we speak, because Christy's here, but before this, she was doing that and she'll do it tomorrow. And so a lot of it is around what are the principles that we would want council to keep in mind in terms of thinking about affordability, you know, the rate relative to what it is now, what would in fact be included in that. And I think similarly, in some ways that the index question maybe got more weight than was needed, because I think the staff actually have a pretty strong point of view on why they use the CPIU and are likely to continue that. But I want to just let them answer that. And then I want to go to Robin.
I don't want us to get hung up because we don't have a whole lot of time to get hung up on just whether this should stay or leave the report. Would you, because I agree with others, if it isn't, if Debbie knows that and it isn't germane, I would take it out. However, I would like you to say, who is the audience for this report? Because I was under the impression that this was going to be released as a public document. If the only person reading it is Debbie, she knows everything in it except what we think. But if it's going to be attached to some,
Yeah,
if the general public is going to read this, then I would definitely take that out, because
yeah,
all 13 of us have tried to do the math and couldn't get
Yeah.
it right.
yeah. No, it's both, to your point, Robin. I mean, the recommendations themselves are going directly to Debbie, along with the staff report. So there's significant work that staff has done, but this is a public process. It is a public document. And that is why there is some background and introduction, so that should someone pick it up and want to understand like what was done, who was there, what were the recommendations, they would have that background. So it is a little bit of a both and, to your question.
Would it be appropriate at this time, rather than put this percent change in the CPI, to use the actual levy lid rates that were in effect on these years?
That potentially, because I think they have gone up and down, if I'm not mistaken, I think that could be helpful to sort of demonstrate. And this is, I think, one of the things that's often hard to grasp, is even though there is an increase allowed, the actual rate can go down. And so maybe I could see that as an illustration could be more instructive than this, because I think this would lead you to believe, if you were just reading this quickly, that every year we went from 139 and it went up 2.99% and then up again. So I think that's potentially a good suggestion. Sarah, I saw you came off mute.
Yes, so definitely if that's causing confusion, we should take it out or just add the rate. And the rate did go down each year in this levy. During the first levy lid lift, the rate did go up because valuations went down, which caused the rate to go up. So, you know, we need to go back into history, but this time what you would see is a continual decline in the rate. However, the assessed valuation went up, and the amount of property tax, that's what was increased by this percent. So the city's total levy was increased by these amounts in each of these years. But that is confusing, and this will be an attachment to the staff report. So, you know, council will likely see it. The public could read it. Anything that would be confusing, we either want to clarify it if we can do that easily, or take it out if it doesn't add anything.
And I'm seeing some support for just showing the actual levy rate over the years. So we can sort of, then we're saying it started at 139, it was allowed to increase, but here's what actually happened.
Yes.
I think as a narrative that makes a lot of sense. So I think that could help.
And then to respond to Lisa's comment about the index and being tied to a national index. the CPI-U is actually a national index, so that is standard. We use the CPI as calculated by different regions. And so, and we tie our salary increases to CPI-U, and that is the primary driver for choosing it, even though if you look at like CPIW, which is another national index, or some of those other indexes that are national indexes, and possibly you might see that the numbers are a little different and you could play with those. But since our salaries are being driven by CPI-U, and that's one of our major cost factors, that it has seemed historically to us like a wise decision to just continue with CPI-U rather than picking a different number just because it might have a different result.
Thanks, Sarah. I didn't come up with that idea on my own. Like I said in the email, I was looking at a publication, which was a revenue guide that's for the Municipal Research and Services Center. So
they're wonderful. They're a wonderful resource, but I just did want to say that when we utilized that, when we first implemented it, in fact, some of the documents that we shared with you probably are heavily borrowed from the MRSC. We use them heavily. So that, no, it's a great resource, but I just wanted to confirm the fact that the CPI-U really is a national rate for good reason.
Okay, great. Well, that's a helpful discussion. And what I'll do is get the actual rates in for that time period. And I think that will make for a clearer story for the casual reader who does pick this up and is not Debbie. So thank you for that. All right. So in terms of the committee recommendations, they are organized, largely by question. And so I'll kind of walk through them by each question. I haven't actually made any changes to to the answer to the first question, because even when there was sort of some I don't knows by the end of our discussion last time, it was clear that people felt like, yes, we should do this. So we're communicating, there is consensus amongst this group that it should be on the November 2022 ballot. I tried to capture some of the things that you all said about why you enjoy living in Shoreline and the high level of service you feel has been provided, and obviously wanting to continue for essential services. We did have some conversation about sort of flexibility and timing. And then I just tried to capture, like, there is a responsibility that I think a lot of you messaged really well around just communicating to residents, like, why this levy, what does it buy? And so tried to put a few of the messages that I heard at our last discussion in there, the kind of why is it, what does it buy? It's actually a replacement, so this isn't new, some of those points. So wanted to see if there was anything else upon further reflection people felt like was missing or they wanted to add or comment on here.
I want to ask you a question. You're just going to hate me when this is over, but I used to do survey design and survey analysis and reporting on survey results. And I think the word many is not good for, there are only 13 of us.
Yeah.
And 7 would be over half.
Yeah.
And I think that it's either most or at least half of, or however many of us did. I think that it's risky to make it sound like this was lots of people. It was just a few people. And so I don't think that's the best word. That's the only wordsmithing I'm going to do. But
I think that's fair, Robin. And again, it wasn't a sort of scientific survey in the sense that it was a kind of a gauge to see where people are at. But in our discussion, I think maybe it's true. I could just say several committee members noted the high quality of life. You all may feel it, but it is true that you didn't all voice it in our discussion last time.
Yeah, and I mean, even calling it a poll may be better than a survey, because that's what you did, was poll us.
Yes, I think that is a very good way to make that. I would agree with that. And I try to say to gauge what they were thinking in the outstanding question. So it is, there's some numbers reported, and we can talk about whether we want to do that or not on the services, because I think some people had thoughts at the time they filled it out and other people weren't really sure. And so I'm trying to communicate more like, what's the discussion we had versus like it was 5 and 4 or it was 13. But I think that's a good, I can do a scrub for that elsewhere as well. I did feel that there was agreement amongst all of you, so I do want to check that there is the sort of responsibility around communication. Guys, yeah, Lisa, and then John.
One thing that I thought, and I know it's mentioned later on, under like number 4, but one thing I thought that should be included in this section as well is just a sensitivity to what's the social context, what's the larger social context that we're dealing with right now. There are a number of families that have significant economic uncertainty and challenges as a result of the ongoing pandemic still. And we're also in a time period of very high inflation. So I think that's part of why there was a question raised that about the timing of this. And I guess the other thing I would note is, to the extent that a number of times in our discussions, we talked about not only the promotion of growth in Shoreline, but a discussion about the need for more affordable housing options. People who currently own their homes are going to see significant tax increases, and they are experiencing high inflation too. So to the extent that a large percentage of Shoreline's revenue comes from property tax, keeping people comfortable and able to afford their tax bills while they live in their own homes, I would think should be considered as part of the concerns about affordable housing.
I'm making a note of that because I think I want to add that to the rate discussion where we talk about sort of fixed income owners, but I think we can add to that. So I will come back to that. But does this capture sort of what you were wanting to add, Lisa? I don't know can you read from your screen? By the way, I can read it out too if it's easier.
Yeah, I like it.
I would also add, higher property values, because that's part of what the headlines are right now, and what Shoreline voters are going to be having on their minds is the fact that the King County Assessor's Office, as I said in that email, has made it quite clear that there's going to be double-digit increases in assessments in certain communities.
So it's not property values necessarily, Allegra. I think it's increased property taxes that we're looking at.
We know that for certain, I guess, is that.
Well, that's what we've read. That
Okay.
Our tax guy, John Wilson, said they were probably going to increase by double digits. That was in the morning paper. But I think that the sensitivity to the community context is an ongoing pandemic, that this is about the property taxes and inflation should be a separate bullet. That's almost a paragraph right there.
Okay.
And just the awareness of, it can be an awareness of increased property taxes and ongoing inflation, something like that.
Okay. I almost might say, well, I don't know. I'm just trying to think. There's now some think it's going to come down, but
Actually, the latest thinking is we're heading into a recession. And inflation is at a 40-year high right now. So
maybe we just say a potential recession or something, or a potential economic downturn might be a way to.
Well, we didn't really talk about economic downturns. I don't remember that.
I think, sorry.
Yeah. So Mary Ellen, why don't you weigh in on this? And I know John's been waiting as well. So
we can't spell all of this. I wouldn't advise us to spell all of that out in this document. We know there's increased property taxes coming, and we know there's high rates of inflation. I would leave it at that. This will probably the context will probably change in the next couple of months.
And I think it could be covered under the economic conditions, like some of those related to the ongoing pandemic. That's where, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I could live with that. I'm going to keep it under, I'm going to highlight it for myself, but all right, John, you've been very patient.
No problem, but I was concerned that one of the comments made kind of as we're getting started was that the council is going to see a different model results than the committee has looked at. And I think there needs to be a disclaimer somewhere in the report that that's the case, that we did not use a current model output. Instead, we were based on what was run in November, and that I'm sure that they're going to be somewhat similar, but it still needs to be noted that we did not have the most latest forecast from the model.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, John. And I think I'll say something along the lines of sort of the committee's recommendations were made with the information shared at the time, you know, much of which has been updated since.
Just so, and council did see the model that you guys have looked at their council workshop in their strategic planning workshop. So we can use that same frame of reference, that was the version you all worked from. And that is an excellent point.
Anything else on this overall sort of number one? So, I mean, again, the main takeaway, I think, for the city manager and council will be like, yes, we support putting us on the ballot. There are some sensitivities, and we're going to especially get to that once we get to the rate section.
And I just want to add that the sensitivity to the community context, that particular line there, I would think also what's happening with our school district with the forecasted lower enrollment over the next few years, if those numbers hold true, that has significant impact, I think, on, you know, city services at some point, and the potential closure of schools and things like that. So I just wanted to add that.
Do you want to add that into this report?
No,
No. Okay, just sort of for general awareness.
I'm just saying that.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. I'm just as I'm thinking this through, I'm thinking of the impact in that particular line right there. That's all.
Got it.
No.
Okay. No,
Don't add the
appreciate that.
verbiage.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. All right. So the next questions, you know, so we had said, should it maintain current level of services? And then there was a sort of, the next question was, okay, well, what about expanding? So the way that I decided to sort of express this one was to say, well, first off, there was a little bit of confusion about maintaining, which I think sometimes the council will probably have that challenge as well. But it is about sort of this baseline level of service. And I think, you know, everyone was in agreement of like, yes, like let's at a minimum maintain. And then I think where we start to diverge as a committee is around whether we expand. For some of you, that's based on the services offered. And for some of you, it's just based on uncertainty around what would that do to the rate. And so I think I hear from some of you, like, if you could deliver all that for the same rate, yes, maybe I'd throw my support, but not knowing precisely what that's going to do. You know, here's what I value, but I can't say for certain that I would support it.
May I have asked this, were we actually told that service levels have eroded as the population has grown?
Sarah, you did actually share that, I believe.
Eroded? I mean, that's such a strong word.
It is.
People can just jump on that.
Yeah. So that's a good point. That is what was said, but Sarah, I don't know if you have, like, would you rephrase that differently, or what are your thoughts in the context of this?
I see that is a strong, there might be a better way to phrase that. Maybe saying in a more service levels, we have struggled to maintain the current service levels.
Well,
I think what I recall hearing is that there was anticipation with continued growth that there would be continued service needs. And one of the things I heard was that you guys were thinking about the dollar impact of continued service, but weren't thinking that growth was going to pull in any additional revenue that you wanted to count on. So that was my understanding of why you were concerned that with continued growth, there would be a need for more services.
I think that's one piece of it as we grow, but I think there's a recognition that even in the current model, for example, in HR with the number of recruitments that they are trying to manage, the number with, you know, more projects happening and the number of how that impacts our purchasing group and our IT with all of the demands, particularly with remote work and with, you know, changes, that it all just takes more. And I'd say that is in somewhat in the service groups, but very much in the support services is where you saw most of that happening, because it's sort of easy to ignore the support services, and then you reach a point at which they break. and part of that is again, back to the context that we're living in. When you have a staff that is all experienced and been in their jobs for 5 years, they're significantly more productive than somebody who's been in their job for a month or 2 months. So, or even for a year. And the city has long had a very stable workforce, but we're facing the same challenges as every other employer right now. So,
Electra, could you just say that as over the course of the 6-year levy, service levels have decreased as the population has grown? Service levels have decreased. I understand what Sarah's saying, but it sounds like, and I just am saying this to you with regard to the public, it sounds like some kind of apologia, you know, that we've got these new people who don't know what they're doing and service level. I don't think that's not a good message. It may be the truth, but I don't think it's the right message. I believe you and I sympathize with you, and the council must know that. Debbie knows it. So I don't think that's a good message.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sarah, does this feel accurate to sort of situation? And then I've got some other hands up as well. Trying to be sensitive to, I think Robin's points around messaging are good.
I think just, replacing erosion with decreased is straightforward.
Okay.
But
So I've got Mary Ellen, then Susan, then James, and then I feel like someone else just spoke up.
I have one
Joe.
other thought. Can we add the word effectively decreased, right? I guess I was thinking to, you know, you've got more people in the same piece of pie, so it's an effective decrease.
Okay. Okay. All right, Mary Ellen, Susan, James, and then I'll go to Joe. Please.
Yeah, I think I understand what we're trying to do here. These two paragraphs, I think, are more confusing. It sounds like we're saying, and trust me, I run a nonprofit. I understand how these increasing expenses happen. Some of them are just, things are getting more expensive. That has nothing to do with an increased population. IT is much more expensive. So we want to say, I think it is simply more expensive to do the same, provide the same level of services that we were doing 5 years ago. To the extent we can tie it to population increase, maybe we could say that, but I guess, Sarah, that would be to you. Is this really popular? Because that seems like a different thing to state than it's just more expensive.
That's a good point. And maybe it's putting the population growth at the end of this statement, because we have, you know, regulations, other context changes, demand for service and I mean, honestly, you're right. It's much of the things that are happening, and this makes the population growth be primary. So
I think we don't say costs have increased, which I think is Mary Ellen's larger, is that just the cost of everything, right? Labor, etc.
Right.
That's all more expensive and getting more so.
And one of the things is, right, costs generally increase faster than CPI, right? So even if the property tax is keeping up at CPI,
Right.
salaries are tied to CPIU, and that helps, but other major contracts and such are not necessarily tied to those.
And I wonder, but has there been, I guess I agree, I think the tying to population growth is confusing, but would you say there has been increased demand for services? Is that fair?
Oh, I think that's very fair.
Okay, so I think then we could say service levels have effectively decreased as costs have increased. Regulations and other contexts have changed. And there's increased demand for services or something like that. And demand for services has increased or something. It's costs. Maybe it's costs and demand for services have increased. Sorry, I will make this better tomorrow. I'm trying to do enough that you can see what I'm doing without driving everybody crazy. I want to make sure we get the main points. Okay, so I had one, James, you have a hand up, and then I know Joe was waiting, and I see you as well, John.
I did have a hand up. Sarah, one of the slides that was presented, I think caused a bit of confusion, at least with me, and that was you explained that you were going to add potentially a dozen FTE if the levy lid was put in place. And at first glance, it wasn't clear to me whether that was to maintain or with newfound money you were adding. And if you could clarify on that, that would be helpful.
I think that what we presented were sort of several options. There was a number of staff needed to sort of maintain services, and whether we would actually add all of those. These were initial department estimates of what they would need, and whether it would be exactly that or not. That was their initial estimate of what would be needed to maintain. And I don't remember the exact number, and that would be a council's decision whether they would get added or not. And it's all part of that rate setting decision. So I think it would be under advisement. Perhaps council would say, you know what, we know HR needs another analyst, but we're okay if it takes 3 months to fill a position, right? And so so those would be some of the discussions, and part of that would go along with their trying to say we need to be respectful of the rate we think that our community can support.
Okay.
So
When I first read that, I put it to my family this way. My kid comes to me and she's short $1 for a hamburger. I give her the $1 and she suddenly also buys a milkshake. So there was a message there of, well, we need this to stay even, but it almost at first glance looked like the additional FTE were additive. And really what you're saying is they are to maintain, not add.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. For that first group. And then there was definitely the next group that was, no, these are true enhancements to service.
Great. Okay, I've got Joe and then John and Lisa. Please go ahead, Joe.
I think we
Are you
lost
there?
Joe.
There he is.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
All right. So if in fact service levels have not decreased, I think it's best to lean on the increased demand due to the population. And I think also, you know, even if we decide that, hey, it makes sense to, you know, put the levy lid lift on the ballot, I mean, it's not going to solve all problems, right? Or all issues or all revenue streams. And there will be headwinds potentially due to uncertainty in the economic marketplace, right? So messaging is very key, you know, to residents, because I do feel that people will be paying attention a whole lot more with increased property tax assessments and potentially maybe even a slide in home prices a bit. So I think that would be, what I would see would be effective messaging.
Great, thanks. All right, John, and then Lisa, and then I'm going to address, okay, Susan, I will try to incorporate some of those other contexts. So please go ahead, John.
I'm just thinking about all of our meetings that we've had in the dependence on the community survey that showed most of Shoreline's residents are fairly happy with the current level of service that they're getting. And I think that has to be borne in mind here, that people are already satisfied. It indicates that maybe we should consider that as the baseline.
So that I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, that we know that there's a high level of satisfaction, and so therefore the baseline is providing that high level of satisfaction.
That's correct, but it appears that level of satisfaction is being provided with the shortage that's been mentioned in terms of the staffing levels already. So there seems to be a little bit of a discontinuity here.
I'm just thinking that Sarah would say that the average resident can't comment on the internal services portion or the legal or the public information officer's role, or, the things that I think have been impacted, some with like changing regulations around public information requests, or so I would struggle a little bit to say that the community knows what the whole suite of services, I guess.
That would be felt more as a lag than right when we're experiencing it. So I think that is also part of it, that once we start to not fill positions, for example, that's just an easy one, and we get behind on parks maintenance or things like that, we're not filling potholes, things like that. We do hear about those kinds of things. And we've had a lot of people reaching out to us about traffic services lately. We've had one position out of 3.5 filled, got a lot of complaints about that. So I think they don't necessarily feel it in the moment, but there is a lagging dissatisfaction that occurs.
And some other examples might be, where IT is able to limp along, but if they're not able to do normal maintenance or projects that allow us to improve our processes, right? So we have a hard time. In fact, our electronic permitting is very much behind because we're not able to give it the resources it needs to be able to have people do really effective online permitting. And network security, as you know, it's all well and good until you have a breach. And then we have a big problem, as well as, maybe it's okay for finance to be understaffed until you end up with an audit finding that then ends up costing you your bond rating. And so some of those types of support services that may, as Christina said, they lag, the impact lags, or it doesn't seem to be an apparent impact to the community.
And I'm just noting Mary Ellen's point that sort of any examples of where maybe we're falling short now could be helpful for messaging as well. Lisa, you've been waiting.
I was just going to suggest for readability of this document, under number 2, what if you just took out the first sentence and instead just say, City of Shoreline staff provided information that, and then go into the thing about the services and the service needs. And wouldn't it read easier? And it'd be, I think it's also easier to input an affirmative statement as opposed to multiple negatives.
So I just want to make sure and I think I agree that this was my kind of saying back to the group, like we did have some confusion, and James described that, right? Of like, we want to maintain, but we need things. So like, that is confusing things. So Lisa, are you saying start with City of Shoreline staff clarified that over the course of the service, has decreased for these reasons. Kane is about doing this, and also this clarification that there is flexibility is unlikely all identified positions would be added.
Right, I just think it,
Yeah,
for me, it reads
Yeah.
easier. It was an
Yeah.
edit suggestion.
yeah, no, I think that is a good edit. Definitely. So appreciate that. James, you still have a hand up. I think that might be a legacy hand, but let me know. It's gone. All right. It happens. All right. I think this is cleaner, and so this is very helpful. All right, the next one, and I do want to make sure, I will make sure we get the number 4 to me is really like the key recommendation, because that really is around the guidance around the rate setting, which is of course the heart of this, and all of the concerns that people mentioned up front. I think we want to capture that. But we did have this question, and again, the council has looked at these very same issues around what about human services expansion, radar, urban forestry, et cetera. And I think what I got with some more recent comments was just an increased support for the radar program and human services as sort of considered to be essential services, and also sharing that that is something that they are hearing from others in the community is a priority. I think there was a point that was made that I did add, because I do think this is an important point, that just because someone states a preference for wanting more of something on a survey, of course, doesn't necessarily translate to ability and or willingness to pay. So it's sort of like the survey should be a guide, but it's not the recipe, because again, at the time that question is answered, we don't typically say, and that would cost you this much per year. So I thought that was a helpful point here. But I think, in general, I think there was a lot of like, sure, these could be really important. But again, I think it's really about like, well, what is it going to do to the rate was the overarching thing I think we heard here. And I'm not sure that is actually communicated perhaps as well as it could be in this section. So Lisa.
I just wanted to clarify, because I saw in some written information that had been produced from the city of Shoreline that the radar program has already gone into effect under a grant. Is that correct? I mean, if so, we might want to make sure there's not any confusion in this document, acting like the levy lid lift is necessary to initiate the radar program because it's already been started.
Yeah, and thank you, Lisa. The staff report will go into that a little bit more detail, and that the program would be looking to go to a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week model, whereas right now we get 6 to 10 hours worth of service a week. So it's a significant expansion of the program.
I think, one other sort of piece of guidance that was shared on this one was, again, just like encouraging the city council to consider affordability. And I think there was one suggestion that, one way to do that is just ensure that, you use maybe some of these new services, replace ones that are no longer needed, or that it's incremental enough and the service is valued enough that voters will support it. So yeah, Robin.
Oh, just going back up there.
Yeah.
On police radar, do you want to just say extension of the radar program right here where you've got the red right there? Isn't that what we just this minute heard? That a few members commented that extension of the police radar program. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Sorry, Robin, you did what I did earlier, which was to point at your screen, which I was looking at you trying to figure out where you were pointing, and I was doing that with someone earlier today. So, but I got you. We're there now. All right. Is there anything else people wanted to just make sure that we communicate on any of these services?
So in this sentence, just
Yeah.
right there,
Yep, Robin and then John.
people agree that services may be needed and encouraged. And encourage, people agree that services may be needed, comma, and encourage the city council to consider affordability. And what affordability is that? It's not housing affordability.
No, and I, maybe we can make this stronger. I think, yeah, I guess, and maybe we don't all agree, but my sense was that many of you feel like these are all services that could be great. Some of you made a difference between nice to have versus need to have. And it depends on what it does to the rate, whether people would ultimately support them, I guess is what I was trying to sort of communicate there.
But it's actually
Maybe
cost.
it's about the addition.
Yeah, it's cost and not affordability.
Yeah. Okay, I know, John, you were going to make a comment, and then I see Mary Ellen.
Just briefly, just a small correction. When that paragraph starts generally, would you
Yeah.
please put the committee agrees?
Yeah,
Rather
thank
than
you.
the people?
Yes, you're right. It does sound a little overarching. Thank you. Any and all suggestions appreciated, honestly, because we, as you've learned, we have a very tight timeline. Expansion, yes. Thank you, Susan, for that. Mary Ellen, you had a hand up. You're done, okay. Lisa, go ahead.
I would suggest, see the paragraph, and I'm pointing at the screen.
Yeah, I know. You can't help it.
That says votes were split.
Yeah.
I think that's a little confusing. Maybe
Yeah.
just the committee members had differences of opinion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, on the options, differences of opinion on the options. I think maybe period. There was discussion on which services residents may be most interested in, questions around what expanding services would do to the levy rate. Again, I think that's a concern that many of you are bringing forward.
All right, this is fun. So right here where my arrow is, given how you just changed that sentence, may be most interested in and questioned. And there was discussion on which services residents may be most interested in, and the committee questioned what expanding services would do to the levy rate. That's what we did. We were interested and we questioned.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to, this is
You can fix it.
first point, so I might say some expressed concerns around. This is a slightly new topic here, but I can look at knitting it together as well. All right. Anything else here that we want to make sure that absolutely gets communicated? Okay, because this, as I say, number 4 is where I think this actually will be something that obviously Debbie as city manager is interested in, and this is ultimately the question that I having already had one conversation with council, they are going to be really wrestling with is like, what's the right rate? How do we think about that? Lincoln, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I think one thing we touched on earlier is that especially in your permitting and your plans review office, that the pace of growth, right, in terms of just new land development is one thing most people may not be aware of that has put a pretty severe, from what you said, demand on city staff and decrease the responsiveness of how long it takes to get things. Anyhow, I just think it isn't covered in here, but it is something we discussed that you may want to put into there.
So, and Sarah, correct me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but we plan to address that separately because it is a revenue producing activity. And so it should be paying for the development and the permits that come in should be paying for that work. And so we're going to be putting that in as a budget amendment or a budget change going forward this year.
Yeah, I just think in the context of what has the city seen, since the last levy lift, I do think it's relevant relative to the fact that the demands on city staff have increased in a way that people may not recognize, both from land acquisition, just the totality of what you've gone through, and the fact that I think the other one that's hard to get your gauge on, but on public safety, the fact you've got unfilled positions for what, 5-6 months, if not potentially longer. I think all of that is the context which, when voters are asked, why would you vote an increase, may be relevant to them to sort of say, we want a city that can be responsive, whether it's an emergency call, a social services call, or the level of service in our parks.
I think, Lincoln, I've added your comment here because I think some of that would be back under, would you want to add that where we were talking about the reasons why sort of maintaining is still hard, even maintaining? Is that sort of where you're thinking of adding this context?
I'm just saying, I know it was a piece of the conversation we had about the stresses on the city. So if you're asking about what is the rationale, or even just the maintenance level increases in staffing.
Okay.
The answer to some degree is the hidden pieces that, people don't see in their day-to-day, what happens on their street.
Yeah. Okay, great. I will fold that back into the maintain side. James, I see your hand up.
So without getting into editing here, I think just a general comment, I think we're all thinking the same thing. We have to be sensitive. You've got inflation, potentially a recession, and assessed values typically follow property values. So if we've had a boom in property values in the last year or so, even if property values moderate or go down in the next year or two, we're likely to have assessed values increasing for another year or two. That will mean that taxes go up. It seems like we have kind of a triple whammy. So we need that this is not the time to push for the range. We definitely need the lower end of the levy lift range. I really don't want all of our committee members' houses to get egged by their neighbors who are upset.
Okay, so I just want to, because I think this is actually related to a point that Lisa was making earlier on. So I want to kind of make sure we're getting all the concerns in here. So, you all talked about obviously adding to the tax burden, giving inflation in the school levies. I also hear sort of and increased property taxes. But I think there's also concerns around levy fatigue and then affordability or household's ability to pay. We did talk about those on fixed incomes or people even trying to gain access to the community, which may be more difficult. But I'm also hearing some concern about just, for people who own a home, even if some might look at that and say, well, there's equity in the home. You're saying that the assessed value is going to lag the increase in property value, and that could come at a time of a recession, or downturn. Am I getting that correctly?
Yes, and another point is some people are still suffering from effects of the pandemic with businesses impaired.
Okay. So the other ads, let me just move my screen up so that people have some time to look at that, and I will try to make this a bit more coherent. I think I've caught the gist of what was being said, but I think it needs to be looked at back to the paragraph.
Do you want to have between lag and property, lag behind property?
Yeah.
Here. Yeah.
Well, and I'm wondering, it's like kind of the increase in an assessed value, I think, is really what we're talking about.
And I think I also heard the point that even if those assessed, if the property values dropped, it takes a while for the assessed value to catch up. with
Right.
that too. So it's both sides. of the coin.
Right. It's almost like that's going to arrive possibly when property values drop. But again, we don't have any way to know that. I'm gonna have to clean. I can't, this is not thinking I can do on my feet right now. So we'll work on that. But I did want to share and make sure that people, so there was general guidance and a few of you who followed up, just had some thoughts on like, calculate what would be necessary to cover the budget for the current level. And then can you go down to like, maybe it's 120 or less so that there's some financial relief while still funding the budget, right? So I think, again, a lot of these comments were around, what's the rate now? How's it going to feel to people if it goes up or down? Again, I think, sharing that this is a difficult exercise to do, but really, I think what should be coming across in these comments that I feel like I heard from all of you is like real sensitivity to the environment that we're in, while also wanting to maintain the level of services, keep, Shoreline a good place to live, but be very mindful of the current context. John, and then Robin.
I think we've also heard that there was a current budget surplus this year or anticipated. And if in that case, it would make sense that we would keep the rates pretty much similar to next year, but having the ability to raise them in the event that conditions get more inflationary and we have to increase the budget amount. So it seems to me that we're at a kind of a point now of just continuing what we have and providing some assurance that in the future we can adjust things if things get out of hand.
And I just want to make sure I understood, and your suggestion is that you would be able to provide that assurance because of the budget surplus, that now we would be communicating that?
No, that we currently have the budget surplus, which indicates that the budget is somewhat in balance right now. So in that case, we don't have to change the rate that much, but we do have to provide the assurance, the flexibility in the future that we can raise the rates if we need to.
The one challenge with this, and this is the law that limits us from being able to have voters approve that flexibility. The only year you get to actually set the rate is the first year of the levy lid lift. And then after that, you're limited to increases tied to that index or to a set percentage. So theoretically, we could, I think we talked about this early on, say, well, we're going to give the council that flexibility. We know that they won't use it. We're going to go ahead and say 5% just to give them flexibility to adjust it if they need it. But I think that would be a very hard pill for voters to swallow. And that's where tying it to that national index, as the MRSC recommends, is why we've chosen to do that in the past. So while what you say makes perfect sense, I'm afraid the law just doesn't support doing that, which is very unfortunate.
No, I would be in total agreement that we just use the CPI-U or whatever index you've chosen, but that the current levy rate appears to be about right for our current situation, isn't it? Especially since we've shown a budget surplus.
For the current year, but once you forecast it out with the CPI and other contractual changes that are going to happen, it quickly changes the picture.
So as an example, Sarah, I just want to make sure that we're all tracking. So your police contract, for example, for next year will also adjust by CPI-U, which would be considerably higher, I would think, than the 3%. And so that means that your costs would come up, or
the cost, the police contract is a very good example. And that actually, the increase is not limited to CPI-U. It is that contract adjusts based upon their actual costs, and the police officers are represented, so they bargain for their pay increase. as well as other costs than cost drivers that the police have. So they've got higher, as do, I mean, there's so many details that we obviously haven't shared with you, but higher insurance rates. So the cost of, because of claims. So there's lots of cost drivers that impact those contracts. So we are anticipating a pretty significant police contract increase next year. At the same time, we also recognize that because there's vacancies, that we get a credit. So we don't have to pay for officers who aren't working for us. And so honestly, we normally don't budget for a credit, but as we're updating this forecast, given what we're seeing, we're actually saying, well, we know we're going to have a credit, so let's go ahead and plan for that credit. There are some certain aspects of conservatism that normally we take, and honestly, given what I'm seeing in the forecast, I'm adding some pragmatism in there, because I don't want to burden the residents with any more than what we absolutely have to. But so John, I wish that it was a case that current rate would keep things going, but I'm afraid that the forecast is not representing that. But that certainly is a fair comment to say that would be your perspective. So I'm not arguing adding it in the statement. I'm just wanting to make sure that we're clear that the model doesn't really support that.
So John, I just want to circle back because, you were offering additional comments. Would you want to say something like, work to maintain a levy rate that's close to the current one, or is there a way you'd like to kind of comment on that?
Well, I think you need to address, at least it'll come to people who follow the council considerably in the budget, what you're doing, or why you're running a almost $10 million budget surplus this year.
So what I hear you saying there is actually like communicate to the public how the budget surplus is influencing or affects the levy rate. Is that a fair, because I think that's a fair point. You're saying people have heard there's a budget surplus, but now we're coming out and saying we need a levy. So there's some sort of communication that has to happen with, there's a budget surplus, so why are we asking? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Robin, you had a hand up, and then Lisa.
Oh,
Robin, you muted yourself.
Robin, yeah. Your hand is up and there we go.
okay. A dollar sign up here by the 113. But I just noticed that and I also noticed that you have in there this statement, my hope.
Oh, yeah.
So are these direct quotes from committee members?
So
I think you ought to say that up here. that committee members, in their own words, committee members expressed or something. Yeah. Because who knows who my is.
Right. No, that's fair. These, I kind of pasted these in, right, collecting comments right before we met. And I think I can point to these being sort of individual. These three are individual comments. Well, actually, I think one person also mentioned on the fear-based approach. So I could just say a selection of individual comments include sort of thing, and maybe that's a better way to.
So if they are quotes, then we aren't necessarily able to and change them. But I felt that using a fear-based approach, I don't know what that exactly would be, but I thought that is there a different way to say that without saying fear-based? What are they trying to make us scared that we won't be, if we don't get the radar program, we won't be safe? And is that what was intended by that?
Yeah, I think, and maybe, I don't know, Lincoln, were you the one who we talked about that last time?
I think what you don't want to do, if you're trying to persuade people, when you say maintain effort, you don't want to say, absent this, the sky is falling. And I think that's the point, is the city has maintained services, even if at a decreased level with the current levy rate. but to try and maintain the expected level of service when the original levy lift was approved, we need to, I think that's why we're bringing this back. And so what I was trying to express there is you can't make people vote yes by saying, but if you don't do this, the sky is going to fall in on you.
Yeah, good.
And so I think then that was where Lincoln went on to say, like radar, for example, is a good thing to use as like, and if we do pass a levy, this is a program that we have now that we know people highly value and we can do more with it. So it's a kind of like, what do you get for money type argument versus like, if you don't do this, it won't be a great place to live anymore. Does that help, Robin? Okay. Oh, Robin, you're back on mute. Robin, you're still on mute. And then I
Looking up here.
Yeah.
I think that that's helpful. And I
Okay.
think it is correct that we won't win any votes with a fear-based approach.
Yeah. Okay. Lisa.
One thing I was going to suggest, but there's been a significant edit since then, is that under now what you've got is the subheading that says selected individual guidance includes.
Yeah.
The first bullet is something I had said.
Yeah.
So if I can edit myself, what I'd like to say is just take out at the end of the second line where it says, comma, perhaps $1.20 or less, comma, just take that out to say, and reduce the levy lid rate to a lower figure. So shoreline property owners, because here's the thing. Like you guys have been pointing out, a lot of the details of the dollar values, even though we're being asked to offer an opinion, there's going to be a lot more information at the point that City Council may be asked to come up with a particular figure. So I don't pretend to know what would be required to fund the city's budget. The other comment I wanted to make quickly, though, about the idea of the budget surplus, I think it would be helpful to put in a dollar figure. My recollection is that it was 17 million. Is that correct? Not 10. At the end of this time period, wasn't it 17 million?
That included the our revenue stabilization fund. So we don't usually count that into our operating surplus.
Okay. So what would you say the dollar value though is of the budget surplus? Is it 10 million?
Yes, it was right around there somewhere. And out of, well, but we could, I
think that's important
check
because
this number. I want to make sure because I don't have it right in front of me. So Christy, if we could double check that number to make sure we include the right number for that.
I do think it makes a huge difference to have some sense of what figure you're talking about there, because budget surplus, that's just, it's so vague. It doesn't really have any meaning otherwise. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, great. I'm putting for now approximately 10 million, and I've made a note, Christy and Sarah, when you get this tomorrow to just to confirm that. I still don't quite like how this is expressed. I want to get the point that this is sort of not the committee's voice as a whole. I think I don't think we need the I think I can edit that to sort of just give the guidance. Again, that was a direct. So, I think the my is confusing because it is meant to be a committee report, but I want to share that some of it is guidance that all of you sort of gave as here's how I would think about it. So Susan.
Now that you've clarified that it's what committee members said.
turn, Robin.
Yeah, sorry, Robin, I'm going to.
Well, I keep doing it.
So, yeah.
Thank you. That third one is mine. So can I change my own self?
Yes, absolutely.
Like Lisa did. So recalculate the levy lift rate, just to make sure what rate I'm talking about. Factoring in the surplus.
Yes. Do you want to say the budget surplus, or I don't know, just while we're at it?
I'll defer to Sarah to you,
Okay.
what word I should put in there.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to change there? Because it is an opportunity.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if you saw my comment like 20 minutes ago. Do you want to say economic downturn?
Yes.
Up above.
Oh, thank you. Which I think, yeah, this whole sentence needs help. So I got to keep working on that one. Thank you. Linda, you have a hand up.
That second comment, knowing that the current rate is $1.13, et cetera, that's fine.
Yeah.
And so I agree that, I'm fine if you guys want to remove my hope, and maybe we can just change that to the city should keep the rate as low as possible.
Yeah.
I think that's all I had for that.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
And again, I think, it might sound, this was a hard question for the whole group. And yet I think this sorts of for the council members, especially to kind of understand how you all thought about it, I actually think is quite valuable because these are the very same things that are running through their head is like, I'm trying to be sensitive. I want to provide services. I'm hearing a lot about this. How do we do all these things? So, all right. Anything else that anybody wants to share on this? Just sort of any overall comments or questions? I've suddenly lost my ability to find the chat, so I may be missing something. Here we go. I found it again. Right. Okay, good. Haven't missed anything. Yeah, Lisa.
I'm looking at my copy of the draft and I'm not seeing it on the screen and I can't move this document.
Yeah, sure.
But right, but somewhere there was a reference to people on fixed incomes, seniors and people with certain disabilities could apply for relief. If we're still, is that still in there?
Yeah.
Now, I know this is a legal requirement that when it goes on the ballot, if the city wants to offer that, they need to say that. And so I'm assuming that the city is going to want to offer that. I guess the problem, I think, is how much that actually means. In some respects, it almost feels a bit misleading. That Seattle Times article that I sent in that email mentioned that, it's some seniors, it's not all seniors, it's just some seniors that you have to make a certain limited amount of income. And some people with disabilities can apply for this, but the tax assessor's office for King County is saying they're months behind in any considerations. And as I had mentioned before in our discussion, even if you qualify, very often it's just that you don't have to pay the tax in the moment, but it's a lien on the property. So it's not as if you get tax relief per se, because ultimately someday when your property is sold, whether it's by you or someone else, the tax will have to be paid.
Yeah, it's a deferral. Sarah, did you want to comment on, should we say something? Does the city need to affirmatively say you would make a deferral and a relief program available, or?
The city has to sort of opt in, and I think what that program is sort of prescribed. We don't get to develop our own. So, but we do state, and I don't think there's ever been a question that we would. I think council would wholeheartedly support that, but Lisa is correct. Number one, it is limited in who it applies to, and it is also not heavily used, surprisingly. And I don't know, to me, it's not great that the county is behind, but I would still say that you'd think more people would at least apply. And even if it took 6 months for it to get approved, but it is sort of surprising that it is not as heavily used as you might anticipate.
Robin, I see your hand. take yourself off mute, please.
Yeah, all right. All of our campaign literature has always had a statement in there to that effect, and given a contact how to learn more about it. So I think it's required, even on, it's required for the city to tell it, but it's reinforced with on the campaign literature that people who qualify may be eligible for a deferral or an exemption. So we'll get the word out.
I guess a question back on the sort of key messages, would the group, and I guess, and this is a question too to Sarah, whether it's automatic or not, but should we be recommending just like, ensure that information about the property tax relief and deferral are available, or, communicated widely or something to that effect? I
think that would be a great addition. Is just, and acknowledging the fact that it's not, as Lisa said, it may not be the most effective program, but it's what we can do, and make sure that those who qualify are made aware that it exists.
We will plan on including it in the staff report that goes to council. We'll say it verbally during the presentation on the evening of. We'll put it as part of the legislation that goes to council. And then if they do decide and vote to place this on the ballot, and we do community meetings, information sessions, so the city has the opportunity to educate the residents and voters on the factual components of the levy lid lift, we would include information at that time about it as well.
And Christina and Sarah, is it the official name is it the senior? I don't know what the actual term of the program is.
I think it's senior and disabled low income property tax.
I will look up the official name.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just so I will remind myself of that. Yeah, Lisa.
Well, if I might, I know you don't want to be bad mouthing the county in an official document, but I think maybe to just put a little bit of a caveat that our committee understands that program has some significant lags in review of applications. Just so, I mean, again, it's the fuller context for the Shoreline property owners.
So would you want to communicate that in the materials, or just express to Debbie that you understand that it's underutilized and there's a lag?
I think it should go into the materials, as it's been recently reported in the news that there are, that the county is months behind in review of these applications. I think that's a neutral way to say it. It's factual. Because I just don't want there to be a misunderstanding about people who are voting on this, about the potential impact on Shoreline property owners that would qualify for the program.
So we could say some sort of caveats about timeliness of application review and approval. John, yes.
Yeah, I have a longstanding commitment. I have to leave the meeting, and I just want to thank the staff and all the people, other committee members. It's been a real pleasure serving with you, and look forward to seeing those of you who can come on Saturday. Thanks again for everything. Goodbye.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
excellent. All right. Anything else? We're kind of at general comments now. Yeah, Linda, I see your hand.
I'm just in the King County website, and it does talk about a 500% increase in emails and phone calls regarding the property tax exemptions. So I think it would be, like we're all talking about this evening, it would be good to just be upfront with that, because yeah.
Great. Yeah, not good. All right. Any other comments that anybody wants to make on this. And then what I'll do next is just, I'm gonna do kind of an around the room. You are absolutely welcome to pass, but I wanted to give a last opportunity if people want to share anything with the city, share anything with your committee members. Any kind of thoughts? Yeah, Robin.
Well, you were down at, you had conclusion was the next word. So can we go back down to?
Yeah,
conclusion?
of course.
And just, can we read that?
Yep, please
Thank you.
do. It's really more about the committee, so I think we can certainly strengthen that.
I'd like you to give us a little more credit there in that first sentence. Although we are working to understand, maybe you could say that the committee understands much better how the city's finances and service delivery, blah, blah, how this works.
Yeah.
Give us a little.
Yes, no.
We're still trying to figure it out, but make us look good.
No, you do look good.
That the committee was highly dedicated.
Yes.
Yes.
No, I mean, I'm just, throwing that out there.
No, oh my goodness. I would agree 100% with just sort of the Q&A and the engagement, and no argument from me.
And then in the next paragraph, just stick with committee while the committee represents.
Yeah.
And so are we in agreement that we believe that we have worked in the best interest of all Shoreline residents?
Yeah.
That's
a strong statement. You're right. I think what I'm also wanting to say here, now that I look at this, because I did write this rather quickly, would be that I think where you have agreement is on putting the levy lift on the ballot. That is sort of the number one thing where I feel like we all agree that that's sort of the best thing for Shoreline. Then when we start to talk about different services or other things, I don't think I'd want to say on all 4 questions, because I do think there's somewhat a diversity of opinion there. And in some cases, we're providing guidance. Lincoln.
But I think we all agreed that maintaining level of service, that the levy lid as associated with maintaining the assumed current level of city services was, I thought, pretty uniformly supported amongst committee members. Not just the levy lid, but the idea of maintaining the current level of service.
Yes, if not knowing exactly what that means.
Right, well, I mean,
I think we agree with the concept, but
I mean, we get into the parsing, how many staff is needed for maintaining level of service.
Yeah.
But I think when we get down to, this is ultimately, right, a document which may be public and therefore is part of the rationale for why to go to the ballot.
Yeah.
And I think my advice to all of you is people don't think in, 5 paragraphs. They think in 3 sentences. So what does the levy lift represent? Why is it needed? What do I get? And I think to some degree, when I think about the rationale for this, I think the committee's pretty much agreed that maintaining at a minimum the ability to serve at the level of service we have today is a primary motivator for recommending that there be a levy lid lift.
Lisa.
I agree with what Lincoln said, and I also want to suggest, and this goes along with some of the rewrite you've already done, Allegra. If you look at the final sentence that's currently under the conclusion, I think it actually should be stricken, because that goes back into that morass about growth and everything. And if instead you have sort of an affirmative statement along the lines of what Lincoln was just describing about the committee having, which I do believe also was a consensus on maintaining existing levels of service. And then that I think would be a good affirmative way to end it.
So we are we kind of, as the city girls, we want to ensure that residents and businesses enjoy the same level of service like seen today, or just stop there?
The same level of services as, currently provided.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
I
don't know how everybody else feels, but I would feel a lot more comfortable with that.
Yeah,
I'm good with that.
that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you for the verbal affirmations and head nods. It's helpful.
Well, I think actually, I don't think it's necessary to mention a staff transition because he was only there one meeting, so it's irrelevant that we lost him. And everybody else did just fine. So I don't think that's necessary, but I think at the last paragraph, if you switch those sentences, as the city grows, the committee wants to ensure blah, blah, blah. And your last sentence of the report is the committee recognizes that this is a significant moment in the evolution of the city of Shoreline. That's a good, tight concluding statement.
All right. Others all right with that switch? Okay.
Yeah, that tightens it up.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So most of our edits are pretty final. There's like one or two sentences that were perhaps a bit of a sloppy rendition of what people communicated. And I'm going to try to tighten that up tomorrow and do a full read before I send it over to Christina. Christina, I wanted to just double check. So this is a bit of a real, back to the real time process you're all witnessing. If I were to share it with the committee at that time, would that be acceptable? I know you have a very tight turnaround, but
That's great.
chance that someone catches something that I have missed or wants to communicate back to the group, some other thought, would that be okay?
Yes, that would be okay. We still have a little bit of time before it actually goes to council. So we have our own internal editing process, but as part of that editing process, it has to be all complete. And so we do need this to go along with the rest of the report. But yes, if someone catches something, please let me know because we do have a couple days before it goes off to council.
Okay, great. So then my one request, Christy or Sarah, if at some point tomorrow morning, you could just send me those levy lift rates for that table, then that way we'll be sending a basically final document along with the approximate budget surplus number, just because when I do send this out to the group, I'd like it to be final in terms of everything we all need to do. So, great. Okay. All right. Oh, boy, we got some real-time texting with John Wilson. Nice work, Lincoln. Okay. So I think then if there are no further edits, I'm going to just go in the order of my participant list. Give a final opportunity for any comments. Again, advice to the council, thoughts to your community members you've served with, anything you'd like to share or not, you're welcome to pass. Mary Ellen, I'm going off the participant list and you are first on my list.
Okay. Great experience. Appreciate the staff. I think the thing that I would just flag, and Allegra, you mentioned this earlier, the staff presentations were long. And it would have been helpful to have more discussion worked into that. I think I didn't quite catch on what our process was until we had gone through all the staff presentations. So the sooner we could have started talking with each other, the better. But other than that, it was a very good experience.
Great, thanks for that. I think lesson learned for all of us, absolutely. Cindy, you are next. Anything you want to share?
Nothing to add. Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks for participating. Joseph?
I would say thanks for the opportunity to participate. Just further understanding of all the stuff that goes on in the city, what staff's doing, how it relates to citizens and our day-to-day lives, and just the growth that the city is potentially experiencing, will continue to experience. Very thoughtful conversations from folks on the committee, so I do appreciate that. And I'm dialing in from Atlanta, so I won't be able to huddle with you all on Saturday, but if you get together, I think it's a good opportunity to break bread and have some community engagement safely. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much. All right, I'm gonna keep going. Lincoln, you had a hand up, so I can go to you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the one
order.
observation I would give for advice, that initial presentation of budget numbers was so dense. And if you remember, we spent probably the better part of a couple hours trying to decipher that. And I think to some degree, thinking through with whoever, whether it's you, Christina, going forward, is going to produce the next round of these as these go further and further into explaining to the public, trying to simplify those down and make sure that you're using, examples that are easier to understand would be really helpful. And I don't think it was wrong information. I just think it was how it's presented was difficult to decipher. And I want to say thank you again. I know how much work it goes into preparing all that. And I do appreciate this has been a very collegial process. So, and I also look forward to seeing the people on Saturday.
Great, thank you. All right, Linda.
I know I've shared this with you all before, but I really appreciated the opportunity to meet together, and I've learned a lot about how the city functions. I've, gained some great perspective, and I've enjoyed meeting all of you that work for the city and all of you in the community. And I do agree with what Lincoln and Mary Ellen have shared. And I am a number cruncher by nature, and I was getting kind of hung up at the beginning with how everything was kind of relating to each other and how it was presented to us. And at one point I actually had to call Rick and to have a conversation with him. So yeah, so this is, I won't have to repeat what they've already shared already, but it's all good feedback. And looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. I will be in Linwood for a conference, but I should be able to zip out during the lunch hour and come on down. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Lisa.
Well, I want to say I really appreciated being able to be part of this process. And I want to tell the city people how impressed I am with all of you and your attention to detail and your commitment. And I hope that you know that I have utmost respect for what you do and how well you're doing things. So if some of my comments or questions may have made you feel otherwise, don't take it that way. Part of my frustration in the initial presentations is that I don't feel that we had an adequate roadmap at the outset. I think to have just some basic, this is what the mission of the committee is. This is how we're going to go about it. These are going to be the presentations. I do agree with Mary Ellen and Lincoln and others that have said we needed to have much more discussion time. I've never been on a committee that hasn't been allowed to function as a committee before. And we didn't get to function as a committee until quite a ways into the process, which I found pretty frustrating. The other thing, I am a lawyer by background and a bioethicist, and to not have a point counterpoint isn't part of the world I have come from. So I would appreciate it if the city folks would think about actually presenting what are the flip side perspectives on what it is they're asking for, so it doesn't feel so biased. If we're supposed to be an independent type of committee and we're supposed to be informed citizens, I think that would be important to do.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. All right. I'm basically going in sort of alphabetical order. So James, I have you next on the list.
Great, thanks. Two things. First of all, it seemed like we jumped the gun a little bit. Lisa, you mentioned this, that we started the process without having the benefit of reviewing the fourth quarter 2021 financials. And so from the outset, it seemed like we were shooting in the dark a little bit. That became more clear as we went along. More importantly, I want to thank you, Allegra, for keeping all of this band sort of organized and moving forward. You have people who have other things going on in their lives and on opinions and so forth, and you've been able to shepherd this group together and keep us moving. I appreciate all of that.
Thank you. Robin.
Thank you. Well, actually, today was a lot of fun when people were emailing back and forth and asking questions. And I I think it's been very engaging, kind of how the committee has communicated and been really good about communicating to reply all, but doing some individual research, finding out stuff, learning things on their own and sharing it with the group and having the staff clarify or confirm. And even though we couldn't be together in person, I think that was collegial as you just said. So I appreciate that. And I really am grateful to the staff. I know this takes a lot of your time to work with citizens, people who are not particularly schooled with everything that goes on with the budget. I have a concern about how we've discussed the reserves, and just when I was on the King County Library System Board, our reserves were explained to us as a basket of money that was needed in reserve for 3 months worth of expenses in case something happened. And we latched onto that, and as trustees, we agreed and accepted that reserve was sort of sacrosanct. And I would like our reserve to be treated that way as well. I would not like to send a message to the public that those $10 million are something we can just dip into if we feel like it, that they're reserved for a purpose, and make the purpose very clear. And so that it doesn't, because some library patrons would show up and say, well, if you've got that much money in reserve, why can't we just spend it? Why are you at you? So I want that to be particularly clear to the public, the reserves, how they're used, their purpose. And thank you all. And as far as Saturday goes, several of you have responded, and we'll have half or maybe a little more than half. A couple of you are not able to come. It'll just be a good time for us to see each other. And we can start at noon, but we have to be out of there by 1:30, and we may not be there that long. So everybody knows where Spiro's is, I'm sure. We'll be in the back dining room. Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. Sierra.
Yeah, hi. This has been just an incredible experience. Thank you for bringing me on. I felt like a newbie. I honestly still am kind of confused by all of this, to be honest. I think the staff did a great job. I do agree with others about, I felt like I was kind of thrown in and I had no idea what was going on. And as I said, I still kind of feel that way. I am concerned. I'm a single mom. I have 3 kids, and I've been here since 2011, and the idea of my taxes going up is just, very concerning. And I can imagine that there are going to be some other people who are going to be feeling that way. So, I'm trying to understand this. I hope that, I can maybe join another one at some point, because I honestly felt I've never been on a committee like this before. And, I work at the Poison Center. I'm on the board of Crisis Connections, and I have been on committees, and I do think there should be more collaboration. I think more inclusion and as much as I feel like I'm taking advantage of the fact that I'm kind of on that platform now, but I want to be able to feel like I'm a part of the committee, and I really had no idea what was going on. And that is the honest truth. I just been confused the entire time. I'm hoping I can spend some time and catch up on what's going on, just so I don't plan to change my opinion, but I want to know more about what I was agreeing to, before it goes out. I can't be there on Saturday. I'm in a doctoral program. I've got a lot of research to do this weekend. So I wish I could meet all of you. Hopefully we'll all get together again in another committee. And then maybe, I won't feel like such a newbie, but thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks for sharing. That's really, I appreciate you just sort of sharing that perspective and how it's felt. I think it is a lot of information, and a lot of it's confusing, yeah. Susan, over to you.
Thanks, Allegra. So this is my second time on this committee. I was on the committee in 2016, and I hear what you're all saying about the Zoom presentation situation. It was so much more collaborative, and the discussion level was so much higher when we were able to meet in person. So hopefully the next time this comes around, it'll be an in-person situation again. But I was really impressed by the city staff 6 years ago, and continue that opinion. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo my thanks. I agree. I think the Zoom has some great things to offer in terms of just accessibility and ease, given that many of you, I'm sure, worked a full workday and then were able to join. And so I think there were some advantages, and I think there's also some challenges, and appreciate particularly the feedback on the format. Certainly, if I were to support this next time, I think we would think about it quite differently. So thank you all for sharing those comments. And I just want to say how impressed I am with this group. You're so committed. Your questions were so thoughtful. It's clear that you care really deeply about your community, and it's great to see people involved. And I hope at some point I see your names in the pamphlet, possibly running for city council or some other position, because the community needs people like you, and just very much appreciate getting the opportunity to get to know you a little bit through this process, and just wish you all the best. And so I also want to thank the staff. They've been really supportive and helpful throughout this process. So just appreciate everyone in the Zoom room right now, and really appreciate all the time that you've given on these Thursday evenings. And yeah, I think if there's anything, Christina, Sarah, anything we need to do before we close out the meeting?
Nothing from me. I'll just say that we will be in touch with the staff report, the first one, and then we won't hound you, but certainly if you want me to point you in the right direction for where to find the staff reports when they get posted for the public and things like that, I'm happy to do that. I also don't want to just assume that you're a government nerd like myself. So, you may want to take some time off, and that's okay. But again, I want to echo, our thanks, and truly we have opportunities regularly for folks to come and collaborate with us on committees like this, short-term, longer terms. There are boards and commissions that you can be appointed to, that they have openings over the course of different time frames, looking currents and things like that for other ways to be involved. But I think you all now have a much deeper understanding, wherever that level is, than a lot of folks in the city based on your experience here. So thank you.
All right. I hear we might break 70 degrees. So maybe summer is going to start. Sarah, did you want to say one last thing?
I just want to thank everybody for your participation and for the feedback you just gave us. I am noting that because this process, number one, I think some of your comments will help us guide our presentation, our factual presentation, should council put this on the ballot. But we will be doing this again in 6 years and all of that. We actually looked back to the last one and we take that to heart. So I really appreciate your candor, and it's all great ideas. So thank you so much. And again, I just want to express my thanks to staff, Christy, Christina, and Sharon, because they have been rock stars, supporting all of you in your rock star work. So thank you.
All right. Well, I think that's enough appreciation for one evening. Don't want to give anyone a big head. All right. Enjoy your evenings. Enjoy your summer. Take care all.
Bye-bye.